Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of The Stat Line, a sports media data podcast from The Measure. I'm John Cassillo, your host. Also, you can find my work at Fabric Media, The Measure, TV Rev, and elsewhere. And with me today are my two esteemed co-hosts, both from iSpot, Tyler Bobin and Joey Marcus. How's it going, guys?
Going on?
Pretty good, John.
You guys want to give a quick intro about yourselves, and we'll kind of jump into what this podcast is going to be about for everyone listening. This should be weekly, bi-weekly, still figuring that out. But yeah, let's just give a little rundown quick.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. I'm Tyler Bobin. I'm a senior brand analyst here at iSpot. Been here almost 5 years. Work with all things brand, networks, sports, assist Joey on a lot of different things. Excited to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have your help on all those. Hey, everybody. I'm Joey Marcus, senior manager of the media partnerships team, which means I handle the account relationships for a ton of different groups. So mainly TV networks. So all the major network families, a lot of those are going through me for a lot of the questions, as well as the major sports leagues. Those are the clients I work with the most, as well as handling and leading a lot of the sports initiatives at iSpot and getting to tell Tyler what to do. So we should be having some fun here and looking forward to it.
Yeah, and for some background on me, I wrote about Syracuse football, basketball, and other sports for about a decade. I've been writing about sports media, sports TV data, sports social video data, other things intersecting with sports, my first love, for about a decade and a half at this point. So if anyone's wondering why I'm here, that's it. This podcast is going to kind of do a quick run of a certain topic, a couple quick data points, and kind of jump on out each week. Wanted to, do something that is a conversation show. We're going to pull in guests over time, but this is going to be, a kind of quick conversation, a small conversation around one general topic, some quick data points. Some of those will be from iSpot. We'll bring in some other data partners over time. Expect which should be an entertaining podcast, and at least initially, we promise minimal amounts of gambling talk. We'll get there eventually.
We're not promising that. Zero promise.
All right. So today's topic: women's basketball, and in particular, Caitlin Clark 2024 women's basketball tournament. According to iSpot data, the women's basketball tournament this year delivered 103.5% more TV ad impressions year over year. Men's one was also up about 13-14%, according to iSpot data. But I think we're now at 2 straight years, Tyler, of seeing about double, triple the amount of impressions for the women's tournament.
Yeah, we're seeing just exponential growth across the board. And I really want to point out, I know we're kind of focusing on women's basketball here, but just women's sports in general are seeing a huge, massive growth. I got a couple stats here for you. This is looking at calendar dates. So we looked at 2022 versus 2023. Women's college basketball, obviously, some of those seasons kind of overlap, but calendar year type stuff, WNBA specifically. So this is looking 2022 versus 23, up 65% as well. So obviously you alluded to the 2024 March Madness being up that 103%. But yeah, WNBA up 65.45% from 22 to 23. Women's college basketball in general, about 72% for the calendar year. LPGA Tour Golf, 25%. I mean, everything is up over double digits. Some even reached triple digits. So the NWSL soccer saw 120% increase year over year from 22 to 23. So yeah, just overall women's sports are just blown up in general, especially within the media space. Yeah, pretty cool to see.
I was stunned this year. And even as someone who's like deep in the data all the time, it was pretty crazy. I mean, Joey, are you noticing some of the same things? And is it fair to say that at least until very recently, like women's sports were an underleveraged asset, both from a network perspective and from an advertiser perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And working with some of the different network groups that are airing these games, especially the women's college basketball tournament, the interest was to see how big those numbers were going to get in comparison to like the men's, where March Madness is typically a tentpole event, and it's a rare tentpole where every single weekend is its own individual one. That's one of the few tentpoles out there that really spans over the course of 3-4 weeks. You put it up there. The only other ones I can think of, sometimes World Cup, but that's a little bit more scattered. Olympics is the other one that's in there. Things that go that long and have that sustained level of viewership that it even grows from weekend to weekends. And you saw that over the course of the women's college basketball. Some of us towards the end of it, we're calling it the Caitlin Clark effect. She is basically a phenomenon to the level of Steph that we maybe haven't seen since Steph Curry. And you saw that within the numbers, where those games that she was in and they were playing in, those were up maybe above a lot of the men's games. They were up there with some of the biggest tentpole events of the entire year. And when you look at it on a broader scale, you look over the course of an entire year, usually every single, it's probably 47, 48 of the top 50 viewership events over the course of the year are going to be NFL. And the other ones are going to be just major tentpoles like Oscars, Grammys. There's a good chance when we look at it for 2024, women's college basketball is going to be in the mix with some of those major things that we're used to garnering 20, 30 million viewers. So it's really exciting to see. And there's been a major shift. And one of the other ones Tyler called out with NWSL soccer, that I think also is a product of a lot of the viewership that's been gained from Women's World Cup. So you take all the people that were ingrained in it with stuff like that, with other major events, and then it's really doing a much better job than it has in the past of transitioning into some of these more yearly leagues. So I'm really hoping that that's going to also happen with the next season of the WNBA. There's already been growth there, but I'm anticipating and hoping that it's going to be seen when it comes to the next WNBA season with all these stars going into that league.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Caitlin Clark, iSpot data showed during the tournament, the Iowa per game ad impressions were 401% higher than the average game for those, which is, I mean, absolutely nuts. The 6 Iowa games were all among the top 10, including the first round, beatdown of Holy Cross. Yeah, I mean, that would almost never happen on the men's side, even at Duke and North Carolina, Kentucky, a national kind of brand that's able to command that sort of like a big audience is still not going to get that sort of audience in the first weekend. So I really like what I've seen. I think WNBA, because you look at the exposure that women's basketball's gotten, WNBA has grown its exposure, and like it's proving the theory correct that people had for years that, well, yeah, I mean, of course men's sports get more attention, they're covered more. So it kind of becomes this like self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if you talk about something, of course it just keeps happening, like versus the second you start putting more resources and putting more energy. And we saw that over the last few years. There was the, talk about just getting all the games on national TV, and that finally happened a few years ago. Like, so there's clearly momentum building there. WNBA has a ton of momentum. I know what most of the, WNBA teams that are hosting the Indiana Fever who drafted Caitlin Clark are seeing, complete sellouts. I know the LA Sparks out here, they, didn't even include the Fever game in their season ticket package for Long Beach when they're down there. So this is becoming the sort of event we've never really seen before. I'm really, really curious to see how not just the TV ratings, but the attendance looks like, because I've been to a couple of WNBA games. They're a lot of fun. I'm curious to see like a really, truly like raucous, sold out crowd for these sorts of things.
Well, the even more fascinating for those semifinal and final games were the out of home viewership. And I can speak specifically for myself, and we have all the numbers, but just being out in the streets and at bars, you could just see how people were engaged with it. Like I went with a couple friends, guys, on a Sunday afternoon to go watch that final versus South Carolina, and every single person in the bar was completely engaged and locked into that game. When Iowa made a 3, everyone was going nuts. Like everyone was locked into a level that you rarely see for sporting events in general, especially when it comes to ones like this.
I think it's really interesting too, because you definitely have obviously we know that the Fever are actually going to have more nationally broadcasted games than the Aces, who just won the championship last year. So that's obviously a nod to the Caitlin Clark effect. But I feel like we've seen a shift really the last couple of years, alluding to that data. Even you can go back to Simone Biles in 2022. We're seeing gymnastics seeing those increases. We're seeing a lot more of, John, to your point, the coverage going on these women, these star power. Serena Williams always lands within our top 10 within talent for advertising, which is another data set that we have within the industry that you're just able to hit these different points and see the growth. One of my favorite things about this was not even actually the basketball games, but it was waking up the next morning and seeing how excited people were to see what the TV ratings were. I mean, you saw this everywhere. Front page of ESPN, all over Front Office Sports, like all of these individual publications that we traditionally know as really kind of more male dominated, were really covering this Caitlin Clark effect and really women's basketball in a way that you've never seen the excitement before. And it's really one of those things where you kind of see tide raises all boats kind of thing, right? So it's going to be really interesting to see, are we going to see a effect when it comes to the Olympics this year? Obviously, we have a couple different things with the WNBA, women's soccer, Ion's now covering WNBA as well. So we're just going to see more and more nationally broadcasted games. And it's exciting to see, like, not only the basketball aspect, but like the cultural aspect that kind of Caitlin Clark's impacting here.
Yeah, I think, Caitlin Clark is part of, like, while she's the focus, and rightfully so for a lot of this spring, I think one of the bigger parts, though, is in the background, like the impact of the name, image, and likeness rules and those changes at NCAA level. I think everyone thought initially when I was much more deep in the college sports kind of like mechanics of things when I was still writing about it, like everyone was like, oh, if you put name, image, and likeness, all it's going to do is give more money to football and men's basketball, like traditional, revenue sports. And that it's just going to be more and more star power for sports that don't need it anymore. It ends up there's more female athletes in this country than there are male athletes, and it ends up that there's also a lot of individual sports that, like, there's female athletes who are very, very famous for on a local level, and that's been able to grow nationally. They've been able to profit off it on a local level. Like you see now, it ends up that women's sports have by and large been the chief beneficiary of NIL, and it's allowed for this star making, from Clark, but Angel Reese, Sabrina Ionescu, all these people who like female athletes, and there's plenty more who I haven't even named, like across sports, who've been able to cash in on like the value they bring, and ends up increase the value that not only they but their sports bring. I mean, I was with my kids a UCLA gymnastics meet like back in February, and place was lit. Like no joke, like absolutely insane. And a lot of it was, moms and dads with their kids who do gymnastics. Just, I mean, my kids are 3 and 5, not really at the age to like be all that invested, but like there was an actual excitement. There was a student section for a gymnastics meet. So I think the longer, like I think this is another episode probably to debate what NIL's done to college sports. But I think from a, lifting up female athletes, lifting up non-revenue sports, and creating more avenues for those athletes to be famous and to, generate interest in their own sport. Like I think successful in my opinion. I think it's really having a great impact for the athletes, but it's also having a great impact for, these rights holders. I mean, realistically, like for, maybe an ESPN, you just signed a new deal to get all these NCAA championships. I personally think they got another deal here because all those championships, many of them being, women's sports, are just going to continue to rise in interest and value, and it's going to really pay off over time.
Maybe the biggest winner of that is probably men's college basketball. As much as we've seen all those other areas you just highlighted, John, that are growing, but when you looked at men's college basketball probably over the last 3 or 4 years, and honestly, especially this year, I don't know if there were the signature athletes that were really going into college and playing for these big programs the way that we had seen over the past 15, 20 years, the ones that we grew up with, when it was basically required to go to college for at least like a year to 2 years before going to the pros. So with that, you're seeing some of the major stars go back to Duke. Like we're going to have Cooper Flagg next year. We're going to have a couple other stars that are honestly opting to stay in college and transfer for another year or two and forgo going to the NBA draft because they can make a little bit more money. So it's definitely lifted that up. I think it's going to make college basketball in general, men's and women's, much more interesting over the next few years. And a lot of people get hung up on the college football aspect of NIL. That's the one that's in the biggest spotlight. That's the one that's highlighted the most when you're talking about, it's going to cost you $1.5 million to get this quarterback to transfer to your school. That's what people are looking at more than anything, and ignoring a lot of the stuff that you just highlighted on. It is affecting women's sports a lot when they were probably not going to make anything throughout their entire career prior to NIL. So there are a lot more benefits of it than just really what gets highlighted in the media.
Yeah, I definitely, just to add on to that too, is, you saw Gina Oriyama. There's been rumors around a one and done hopping into women's basketball too, and talking about kind of the ramifications of that and everything. But coming back to winners, is I really think a lot of the brands that advertised during March Madness women's tournament were winners, right? There are a lot of these more forward thinking brands that, John, you and I have been tracking this for 4 years now, just looking at year over year changes. And we've been seeing a steady increase in brands advertising in both the men's and women's tournament. And we're just seeing that more and more. And if you're able to get in on this kind of last ship out, I feel like the values it's going to be interesting to see because, you know, when you start talking about those nitty gritty metrics, the value is going to be a lot different next year because I feel like the word is out and people understand how valuable this is for both an audience standpoint, but bringing new people into sports. I mean, it's kind of the same thing. Again, another whole different podcast thing, but what Taylor Swift did to football in terms of bringing all these new fans into football. You know, Caitlin Clark and really women's basketball is kind of doing the same thing for the college side of things. So it's really interesting to see these kind of new and upcoming and really these stars that 10, 15 years ago we might not have seen. It's really cool to see.
I'm just curious how the shoe deal is going to go also with her getting it announced and getting away from a little bit of TV viewership, but more just the impact it's having on people. Like her getting a shoe deal. I'm curious if there are going to be guys that are going to go out and buy it. Because I actually had someone that I was just playing pickup with the other day recommend the Sabrina Ionescu shoes. And honestly, when he said it, I was a little stunned because that's just traditionally, it's like you're getting LeBrons, you're getting Jordans, you're getting D-Wades, whatever it is. And so I'm interested to see if the new viewership and the new like audience that's brought into women's sports is going to be willing to show that and express that into the greater world, not just like, oh yeah, I watched the game last night. It's like, oh yeah, I'm willing to rep this when I walk around.
I just want to call out right now, if this ever gets to Caitlin Clark and Nike, if they make a size 15, I'm rocking them. It's just, if it ever does, there's just a nice little call out, you know?
I need a new pair myself. I've been rocking the same ones for 12 years. Everyone gives me flack about it.
Yeah. It's probably a good place to stop. I feel like there's a lot of avenues we could go down, but in the interest of keeping this one a little more succinct, why don't we stop there and there'll be more next time around. Tyler, Joey, thank you guys. Appreciate you jumping on for the first of what's hopefully many of these engagements. Thanks everyone for listening to the Stat Line, a sports media data podcast from The Measure, and hopefully see you soon.